I've just cleaned this up a little bit to section out, and we want to do find the number of mid, top, etc. players in Challenger and what their most played champion is. So let's look at how we might want to do this. Let's hop over to the Riot API, developer portal, look through these. Let's just click through these and see if we can find one that we want. What about a league? Yeah, here we go. So we want to have access to the league thing here. This will tell us who the person is, the entries, and their tier. So, for example, this is what we would get back. It's a JSON file, so it says tier, challenger, the ID, the queue, the entries, and for each entry it tells you their summoner ID, their summoner name, etc., etc. So this is ideally what we want. In fact, if we look at the code here, it says challenger league equals get challenger league, cast pro, and then the best in NA is the first index there. So this is actually already doing the code for us. But however, we want all of them here. So let's create a function actually called def get challenger players. And let's print all the entries because it's yeah, actually let's just print challenger league and see what comes out. Let's see what happens. Nothing interesting. What if we do dot entries? Nothing interesting as well. So what's going on here? Well, we checked the Cassiopeia documentation. Well, let's say we want league. So it says here we want get challenger league and it returns challenger league type queue. Alright, so it returns a league. And we have entries, ID, name, whatever. So let's look at just the first entry and just look at the summoner name. Which would just be 0 dot summoner. I think that's correct. Yeah, so this is the first entry there in the Challenger League object, and this summoner, which is their name. Okay, so let's actually go through and print all the challengers. So let's do for item in Challenger League, print item.summoner. So this is all of the summoners that are in Challenger. There's a lot of them. Actually, I wonder how many of them there are. Easy way to find out. Print. We could just go to print Challenger League dot length. Oh no, it's gonna be oh, that's right. It's Python. Let's print len dot Challenger League. And we don't care about this anymore. Looks like there's 220 challengers in NA right now. So we have an idea in mind. We want to go through the list of the challenger players. In order to figure out their role and their most played champion, we're going to have to go through their match history. How exactly do we do that? Well, it's simple. We look at the Cassiopeia documentation. Searchable containers. Let's see if this works actually. Sometimes this documentation doesn't work. Oh, it's going to be cast.summoner. Yeah. Looks like it doesn't work. So this is why we check things. Looks like they just haven't implemented it yet in Cassiopeia. So we need a better way of doing this. Alright, so lucky for you guys, I've done this type of thing before. So I've gone through, searched through the Cassiopeia documentation, and sort of figured this out. But if you want match history, you first have to define a summoner. So as we saw earlier when we were pulling the summoner names, you just go to the index of Challenger League, get the summoner object, and assign it to a name. So we are looking at the match history of the first item in the Challenger League, so whoever's ranked 1. And we're looking at their most recent 5 matches, because Python is 0 index. So this would be like looking at match 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. As you can see, that's 5 actual matches. And then each match has different attributes. Again, you can refer to the Cassiopeia. Actually, I'll just show you. Let's look at match duration. Yeah, so here we have Cassiopeia match. So it says we have blue team, creation, duration, exists, etc. A lot of stuff. Oh, we can even pull kills heat map. So let's print the match duration. And actually, I want to see kills heat map for every match. So for every match in his match history, i.e. the most recent 5, let's print the duration and look at a kills heat map. So let's go ahead and run this. Making the calls. And... okay, so it looks like plots appear here. Alright. Looks like this was his most recent game. There was a lot of people who died in mid lane. Again, a lot of people died in mid lane. This one seemed to be more scattered. But there we go. And we also have our durations here. So the first game was 25 minutes. And the second game was 20 minutes. Oh, oops. No, so the first game was 26. Second game was 25. Third one was 20. Huh. Anyway, so you can see the advantage of Cassiopeia. You can just pull a bunch of stuff and it's super easy. So we have match and match history, and we want to know their role specifically. So we would first need to identify which person in the match they are, and then from that figure out their role. So Riot does actually provide the lane and the role, but it's not great. So the way we get around this is someone actually did a library that allows us to do that. So it uses machine learning to sort of figure that out. You just feed it the timeline and the match. So in order to do this, we need to pip install rollml. You just go to the command line, and let's do that right now actually. Pip install rollml. See, my library already has this because I built this from the online environment, which means life's easier. Alright, so I cleaned up the code. It's the same as last time's code, just a little bit cleaner and easier to follow. So first we get the Challenger League data and we just store it in this variable data. We want to know the summoner names, the actual roles of all the people in there, and then their main champion. So we create these arrays that are empty that we'll put in later. So for each item in our entries, i.e. each person in Challenger, we want to do stuff to them. This says for every 10 people in Challenger, just print what current entry you are, so it provides feedback to the users, they know what's going on. And because we want to look at the top 9, just to save time when I'm running this, it just skips everything where the index is greater than 9. So the else here means it just catches everyone whose index is less than 9. So first, let's append their summoner name here, so we know who we're actually keeping track of. And then we do that item.summoner that I spoke about earlier. This allows us to pull their match history of their most recent 4 matches. And we want to know those roles in those 4 matches, and those champions in those 4 matches. So for each match in their match history, if it's a remake, we don't care. If the duration is less than 15 minutes, i.e. a forfeit, I've also gone ahead and skipped that. You don't have to, I just don't really care about forfeits. So now, if it's not a remake, it's not a forfeit, we want to know the top, mid, jungle, support, whatever role, and their champion. So we need to actually analyze that match. This is where the role NL is going to come into play. Alright, so I've gone ahead and fed this in. So what we want to do is first check who the person in the match is that we're looking at. So we have the summoner from our list of Challenger data, and we want to check in the participants attribute who it is. So that I'm just naming this P. And then we're just following the same information from rollml. You can go ahead and read this here. See, you just predict, feed it the timeline, and it'll spit out the role and yeah, just the role. And the lane if you want, just based on what parameter. So I have full here, so which is by default is going to put out these mid solos and so on. Oh, by the way, you have to use this match.timeline.load just because of how Cassiopeia operates. So if we check the documentation, it says match histories are lazily loaded, i.e. you have to actually load it every single time, otherwise it's not going to get loaded, so that just saves memory time. So you have to use this timeline.load. So we feed in as the documentation has said for rollml, and we get rollback. And we want the champion that they're playing, so we just get the champion ID. So this is going to print the champion and role for every match. So let's go ahead and put this in our else statement. So analyze match. And we want to spit out this champion and role here. Alright, let's go ahead and run this. Alright, so I've actually had this error before, and it's really annoying, and the only way I was able to fix this is by a lot of Googling, which you will do quite a bit if you're building things. And you fix it by just installing this version of Geos, which will like fix the executable or whatever. But that's how you fix that issue, in case you run into that one. Alright, so that's fixed. Let's run it and see what happens. Oh, it looks like the first instance of the first game of the first person was playing champion ID 145 bottom duo carry. So you can see it's printing that out each time. So maybe we want to add these to our role and champion dictionary. So let's do .append role. And we also want to append our champion dictionary. Then let's at the end print our role and champion dictionaries. Let's clear that. Close these files. And do that. Oh, it's still printing. Oh, I didn't want that. These are the roles that we're looking at. And these are our champions. So the issue with champion IDs is we don't really know what champion that is. You can do this by going over to the Riot developer portal. Where is it? Docs League of Legends. And it tells you how to deal with the champions. So if you go to this JSON file, it'll tell you all the IDs and you can map the IDs. So I'm going to go ahead and write that code now. Okay, so I've gone ahead and downloaded that JSON and formatted it so the champion list is indexed by keys. If you're curious what this looks like, it looks like this. So we have our keys and the key links to each champion. And I sort of just dumped everything out except the keys. So we just have this block here. So that way, when we go to this bit of code here, we take the champion ID number and go to our champ list and figure out what's the champion's actual name off of that. So we run this code. As you can see, I was testing earlier to make sure it works. Always make sure your code works, guys. And let's see. Yep. So we have all of our roles and we have all the champions. So we want to know the most common role for each person in their match history and their most common champion. So you can see here we have roles and champs. I've changed these from roles Dick and champ Dick. So this is the roles and champions for each player, whereas these are the roles and champions across all of the players and challengers that we're looking at. So we want these arrays to represent each player's main role and main champ, whereas these represent each player's roles and champions total. So now, since we have their role and champions for each player, we want their most common role and their most common champion. So actually, let me go ahead and print these. And you'll see why I'm doing this 1-0 thing. So this says get their one most common, and then if you add a 2, it'll be like, what are their 2 most common ones? Let's do that. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, so you can see here that this first player plays bottom duo carry a lot, and their most common champion is Kaisa. This one they play bottom duo carry, and the most common champion is Caitlyn. Again, these numbers aren't very high because we're only looking at 4 games. So if we wanted a better sample size, we would increase this for the number of players. The reason I have this 0 here means we only get this role. We don't really care about the number of games. The only reason we care about the number of games right now that they play each one is to ensure that it's their main. So for example, you could do some math to figure out like, hey, is this greater than the next one by a certain amount? Alright, so it looks like that this player, the first one played bottom duo carry as their most common role, with Kaisa as their most common champion. You can see the rest here. This is the number of games they did. So they played 3 bottom duo carry game. This is the number of games. So you can see they played 3 bottom duo carry games out of their most recent 4. And they played Kaisa 1 time out of those 3. The reason the numbers are so small is because we're only looking at 4 games. So you may want to increase this in the future. I've just reduced it to 4 because it's easier to manage, and so you have to make calls to the API for every single game. So here's the end result here. We have their main role and the number of games played on that role for the top 8 challenger players, as well as their, well, top 9 actually, as well as their most played champion. So we can see that Kaisa, Caitlyn, Rengar, Thresh, and so on. So let's delete this, delete this. And let's look at the top, I don't know, 20 players and their past 10 games. This might take a while, so I'm gonna go ahead and skip this. It looks like there's a lot of bottom duo carries in here. But yeah, so basically now we have each individual player, their main role, and their main champion. So that basically is a wrap of what we wanted to do. Let's actually format this data output so it's a bit easier to read. Right? Let's run this. So here, fun fact, if you have different code cells in Spider, which you just do using hashtag %%, and you do shift enter, it'll run that cell. So I just wrote this definition here, ran this so it saves it in the background, and I can just call functions directly in here instead of having to wait that whole 4 minutes because it's going to run this summoner names thing here. So let's go ahead and do that. Yep, so here we are. We have the summoner name, role, games, and champion games. So now you can just do whatever you want here. Maybe, for example, you want to know what the highest rated jungler plays. Well, it looks like he plays Rengar. You want to know what the highest rated support plays? Well, looks like they both play Thresh and such, so you can figure out the one tricks or so on. So yeah, now you can see hopefully the advantage of using the Riot Games API and getting data. Or actually, let's do this for Korea. I'm actually curious, and I only want their most recent 4 games, and I only care about the top 5. Alright, looks like the #1 Korean player is a top soloer who plays Aurelia. And number 2 and 3 are actually 80 carries. I think this is an error. There's no way this dude plays Gragas bottom. I don't believe this. I gotta look this up. Oh yeah, because this is his most recent game, that's why. So it's gonna think he oh, he did! Oh, it counted as support. Okay, so I guess the machine learning classifier didn't work as nicely as I would like. Okay. But yeah. Hopefully you can see the advantage of having such a powerful tool in your hands. Good luck out there, and I can't wait to see what you guys build.